As soon as I make funny faces, it goes. Hey, everybody. I am Haley Gray. Welcome. Give me a hello. Give me a hi. Welcome my guest, please, Attorney Dianna Stallone, to the stage, to this live with me. And let us know, do you have contractors working for you? Are they 1099? Are they W-2? Are they in the U.S.? Are they overseas? I see some big old things going on here. And, this is why we've got Dianna here talking about some of these employment issues and whatnot. So welcome, Dianna.
Thanks for having me, Haley.
I'm excited to have you here because this is a thing. This is like a can of worms. I feel like
it really is.
There's this thing that I see with small businesses that is hire a contractor or a virtual assistant and have them do all this stuff for your business.
Right.
And
it's pretty common, and it's becoming more common now, especially after COVID and everyone's working remotely, and it does cause a little bit of problems. And in fact, one of the most common and sometimes devastating, not always, but sometimes devastating mistakes that people make is that they think they've hired an independent contractor when the law would consider that they had hired an employee. And when you hire an employee, it's probably the step that you're going to take that's going to open up the biggest can of legal problems for and not necessarily problems, but legal regulations that if you don't know where they are and you don't know how to avoid the landmines that are there, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. And so it's important. So a lot of people justifiably decide, I'm just not going to hire any employees. I'm just going to hire independent contractors. And that's fine as long as you do it correctly. And as long as you haven't actually mischaracterized a employee as an independent contractor. And the bad news, and I just want to clarify that I'm speaking to U.S. employers here. I actually don't know what the law is in other countries. I would guess, though, that this is a landmine in other countries as well, and that you would need to really look into what regulations are there. Am I legitimately calling this person an independent contractor, or are they really an employee? And I'm guessing that would be true everywhere. The specific regulations and the way the law might look at that would likely be very different. And in fact, I actually can't tell you whether it's different or not. So I really am speaking about U.S. employers. And one of the problems we have as a lawyer trying to kind of give people advice or information about the way that they should conduct businesses is that every state is different. And so it's very difficult to give a kind of general idea. But in this area, the law is relatively consistent, with the ones being some are more strict than others. So I'm going to tell you about the most strict way the law will look at that, which happens to be in Massachusetts, which is one of the two states that I regularly practice in New York and Massachusetts. And so the issue with mischaracterizing a independent contractor or an employee as an independent contractor is that it can trigger catastrophic losses and problems. And so it's important to kind of at least understand, well, what is the problem here? And I think the mistake that people most likely often make is that they assume that if they and the individual both agree that you're going to be an independent contractor, and they even put it in writing, you're going to be an independent contractor, and they send the person a 1099, they think that as long as everybody agrees, that means you're safe. And that huge problem, because it is legally wrong. That is not the standard. The law looks at the relationship between two business people in an objective way based upon objective factors that the law imposes you. And it doesn't matter what you agree to. Now, I guess maybe it's a little strong to say it doesn't matter, because certainly that would be one factor that the court might look at. But basically, the court's going to say, look, we don't really care what you call it. We are going to decide for ourselves whether or not you're an independent contractor. And it's important to know that the state has a financial interest in making you pay employment taxes and unemployment taxes and uninsurance taxes for everyone. And so they have a financial incentive to call people employees as compared to independent contractors. The law and judges also tend to think that people are being taken advantage of because they're not getting benefits that they would normally get in the employment relationship if you're being characterized as an independent contractor. I personally think this is something that probably needs to change and evolve a little bit as people become more and more remote workers, and it's more and more likely that people are going to be working as independent contractors. That's the way the law typically looks at it, is that we're gonna decide for ourselves. So the question then is, well, how does the court decide? What factors does the court want to look at to decide whether or not somebody is an independent contractor or not? And typically, the court's going to look at, does this person work at your demand? Do you have direction and control over that person? And so the state, what does that exactly mean? And it means, for example, I'm going to give you an example of a classic independent contractor, a true independent contractor that all the laws will likely agree that person independent contractor. Plumber. When you call a plumber, no matter what your business is, you call a plumber and you call the plumber and say, hey, I got this problem. The plumber comes when he feels like it. The plumber works whatever hours he wants. He brings his own equipment. And although he's coming to your place of business, he is in control. You don't tell him, okay, I want you to use this part and I want you to insert it in a certain way. That plumber has direction and control, excuse me, over the way he or she does the job. That person also, the other important thing is that person typically owns their own business and has their own insurance and pays their own workers' compensation. And so for that reason, that person's a classic independent contractor. So the law is going to look at this and say, if you think about it, those were a lot of factors that I put out there. You know, does the person use their own equipment? Do they do it on their premises or yours? Do you have direction and control over them? Do you dictate the hours that they work? Do you tell them what to do? Those are all important things. In Massachusetts, the strictest law probably in the country basically says, we don't care about all that. What we care about is number one, does this person have their own business? And in which they provide the same service to multiple other people besides you. So you're a graphic designer. I provide graphic design for 10 other people. I'm in business for myself. The second thing is their business different from yours, or is it a component of yours? Example, my secretary is providing legal services. So a component of my business is going to be secretarial services, administrative services. If the person I hire only works for me, it is part of my business. It is the nature of my business to include that piece. And if it's part of my business and that person does not provide that same service to multiple other people, the law in Massachusetts is going to say, you're an independent, you're an employee, and we don't care what you agreed to. And so it's quite important. And so this piece of, is it different from your business? If you go back to the plumber example, the plumber has a business that is uniquely different than yours, unless you're, also a plumber. And the same is true for legal services, or even for the most part. Somebody calls me up and wants me to provide them with legal services, and I provide those same services for a bunch of other people, and it's very different from the businesses that I service. So that's the important part of what it is. And if you provide that person with a business card with your name on it, you're just asking for trouble. If you say, I'm going to give you employee benefits, you're also asking for trouble. If you say, I'm going to give you time off, or you're going to come in and work on certain days, or if I tell you exactly, I give you a list of things that you must do in a certain time, you are exercising direction and control. You are giving all kinds of signals that this person is actually an employee and not an independent contractor.
Yep. And that's tricky too, because a lot of times, somebody could be, doing virtual assistant services only for you. They could potentially be working,
and that's going to be a problem.
But you don't know if they're also working for other people, right? Or not. So that could be a tricky kind of thing.
Yeah. I tell my clients that they need to inquire, and that they need to actually figure this out when they set up the relationship. If a person doesn't have their own business in which they're providing that same service to other people, there's a very strong likelihood that of course they actually work for you. They're your employee, especially if they're working full time or even on a regular basis, Tuesdays and Thursdays, or so many hours a week. You're having all kinds of problems. And if you say it, you pay the person, it's also important. But I think the important thing to know here is that there are serious consequences if you do it wrong. And I would like to point those consequences out, because a lot of people don't realize, they think it's kind of a harmless thing. And what they don't realize is the catastrophic losses that they can incur if they do this wrong. I had a client who, and this isn't a catastrophic loss, this is just more the common kind of loss that you would get. I had a client, this was a New York client, and she was a young entrepreneur. She provided graphic artist services to people, and she was doing really great. She actually ended up having more clients than she could actually handle, and so she farmed out the rest of the work to a whole bunch of other graphic designers. So if you think about this, okay, and they were all people who just worked for her. And so what happened is that she got, just out of the blue, she got a letter from the Department of Labor in New York saying, we have determined that you are missed employees as independent contractors, and here's a $10,000 fine. And by the way, you better get a lawyer. And we've referred your case to the Department of Revenue. And so now you have the Department of Labor coming down and saying, we're giving you a $10,000 fine. We're also going to charge you for unemployment insurance for all of these people. And we're case to the Department of Revenue because you pay your employer taxes. You didn't pay the 15% of Social Security we're supposed to pay. Plus now there's family medical leave tax. And also, now you're looking at all of those plus the $10,000 fine for doing it wrong. And believe it or not, those were the good consequences that could happen as a result of this, because the worst case scenario is that some individual is working for you as an independent contractor, and they're going out and going to a job site or doing whatever they're doing, and they get hurt on the way or while they're on the job. And now that person let's say they suffer a devastating loss. They lose both legs. They can never work again. They're paraplegic. They're in a wheelchair, and they have, millions of dollars in medical bills. The first thing that's going to happen is that a lawyer is going to get involved in that. And a lawyer is going to say, well, wait a minute, you're going to go to your doctor, and your doctor is going to say, well, how did this happen? Oh, I was at work. Oh, well, guess what? Your health insurance doesn't cover that because it's a work-related injury. And the work-related, and so now the person doesn't have any health insurance to cover that. And what would normally cover that would be your workers' compensation insurance, which of course is not going to cover someone who's a independent contractor. So now that person has lost wages, pain and suffering, loss in use of their legs and body parts for the rest of their life, and a couple million in past and future medical expenses. And guess who they're coming after? They're coming after you. And if you don't have your business set up as a LLC or a corporation, they're going to come after your personal assets. And even in some instances, if you do have it set up and you haven't done that correctly and kept the correct records, they're still going to come after you. So it's really super, super important that you understand that this can happen. And this woman, the one I told you about, she was bewildered. Like, how did they find me? I don't even have a physical premise in New York. I'm just an online business. How did they even find out? And how they is that when you give that person a 1099, that 1099 goes to the Department of Revenue, and the Department of Revenue looks in, decides, oh, look at this person has a 1099 from one person, doesn't have a 1099 from 5 other people. And let's investigate this person and see whether or not this is genuinely an independent contractor or if they're actually an employee. And so that's one way that it can happen. The other way that it frequently happens is that you have a fight with that person, and or something goes wrong in the relationship, and that person gets a lawyer involved. And the second the lawyer gets involved, the lawyer is going to look at the entire relationship. And then they're going to say, well, wait a second, you've been paying self-employment tax of 15%. And your employer was supposed to be paying that, and you didn't get your employee benefits, and you don't have the right wage, and you weren't paid overtime. And so now you have all kinds of other problems, because the Department of Labor also looks at, did you pay this person correctly in accordance with the wage and hour laws? So it's really a big can of worms. It's really important that you make sure that if you're going to hire people who are independent contractors, ideally you want them to have an incorporated or an entity or an LLC, in which they have their own workers' compensation insurance, they pay their own benefits or whatever, and that they provide that service that same service to other people. And if you can structure things that way, it's never 100% foolproof. I mean, you never know what the law is going to do, but that is certainly the best case scenario if you can do it that way.
Yeah. Well, and I've actually seen senior home care agencies that would require people who work for them to form an S Corp in order to be hired.
Right.
And one of the things that always made me leery about that, even though you have them form an S Corp and provide insurance, is, if you're hiring that S Corp, that person, for, 60 hours a week or whatever, and that's a sole person working for that S Corp, that person gets injured on the job, it becomes really easy to come back and say, hey, this person was actually an employee and we were, come right through it.
It's just a subterfuge. And Court basically said, look, we're going to look objectively at this relationship, and we're going to look at the facts on the ground. part of it is that the law wants people to be protected. They do want people to be protected. I do think, you look at Uber, and, there was a case out in California where, Uber drivers were all in contractors, and they got a multi-million settlement. That settlement allowed them to continue to be independent contractors. But that case could be brought in any state. And so it can really be problematic. And if you're set up as a subterfuge, especially if that person's working for you 60 hours a week, it's going to be tough to argue that that business is anything but a shell or anything but a subterfuge. So you really do need, sometimes it's better to just hire the person, hire them as an employee, give them what they're supposed to have, provide insurance. And you don't need to necessarily provide health insurance. You do have to provide workers' compensation insurance, and you do have to pay the unemployment insurance in case you fire somebody. Then you have to, you're going to end up paying unemployment insurance because people collect unemployment. So it's areas where it's kind of unfortunate. And I think that this area to evolve over time. And as we can see a pretty big cultural shift because of COVID, the way people are working. And so Connecticut, this area is going to shift. But for right now, this is the law in many of the. If you want to know what the law is in your state, go to the Department of Labor website in your state. They want you to comply with the labor laws. And so there's a ton of information on there to help businesses comply with the labor laws. You want to comply with that. You want to comply with the wage and hour laws. This is why, I do have a business boot camp in which I teach people all about the employment relationship and all about kind of posters you need and what you need when you put your ad out. Does it need to say all kinds of stuff that's regulated in a way that you just can't believe? I mean, it's genuinely disturbing how regulated businesses are. And so most of the landmines that are there can be easily sidestepped if you just educate about what kinds of things you need to know in order to run a business. And then, like I said, the minute you hire somebody, you've stepped into like another level of risk.
Yeah.
So you just want to protect yourself because hard, you're making a lot of sacrifices to run your business. You really want to blow it up because you just didn't realize that you're about to step on a legal landmine.
Totally.
All that's the good news, right?
Well, I mean, this is part of, having a business, right? And that you're then, expanding and growing and doing all the things. And part of being a business owner is dealing with the accounting and the finances and the employment law stuff and all of the legal stuff, and you don't have to be an attorney, but you do have to know enough about things in your business. And Leigh Scheidel points out, another point, ignorance of the law will not be a legally accepted excuse for not knowing. Exactly. And not knowing can cost you everything.
And the thing that's not an excuse is everyone doing it, or I've been doing it this way for years and I never got caught. I can't tell you how many people say this to me. Well, that's the way we've always done it. It's like, well, lucky for you, you haven't gotten caught and punished. Now would be a good time to change that. Now that you can be lucky if you're walking through a field of hidden landmines and maybe you don't step on them. But if you don't know where they are and you're just going to continue to wander around that field, still going to be in the business, you really, it's better to just educate yourself and say, oh, I can sidestep most of these things. If you know how to structure your relationships and you know what the risks are. Sometimes you're willing to take the risk and hire somebody as an insurer. Sometimes people do that. And you just want to make sure that when you do that, if you decide to do that, that you do it knowing what the risks are, and that's a conscious decision and not a mistake. Just to be clear, I'm not advising anybody to violate the law, but I'm saying people do it. And like I said, you really do know what it is you're doing and what the risks are.
Yeah, just like you have to make, calculated decisions about your accounting in your business, about your employment, who you hire. There's so many risks that we take. You have to decide, what side of the line you're willing to hopscotch on, because I will say pretty much every business I know hopscotches across the line back and forth and figures out what risk they're willing to accept and what risk they're not willing to accept. And that's a personal decision.
It is. And it requires you to just educate yourself. And that's the reason why, I wrote a book, which I have a free copy of it on, I think on the Women's Entrepreneur Network. There's a free copy of a lead guide in which you copy, and you can refer to it when you have a question. It's not the kind of thing you want to necessarily read cover to cover, but if you have a question, say, geez, what does the book say about this? And I will point out lots of those landmines that you just can easily sidestep them. Just you gotta take a little minute to educate yourself. And one of the things people do, there's so many costs of starting up a business that people are kind of going on a shoestring right now, especially a lot of older people who have gotten outsourced from their jobs and are never getting hired again. And so they're getting kind of pushed into the entrepreneurial space, and they're not necessarily equipped to do it. It's just explained to you in really simple terms. Look, here's where these landmines are. Here's how you just bypass them. Every now and then, you do need a lawyer who's going to help you be like a bridge to get over certain landmines. Like you're never going to buy a business or buy into a business. Whether it's a terrible idea. Sometimes I see women on the Women's Entrepreneur Network, and they'll say something like, oh, my so-and-so has a bakery and he wants me to take it over for $50,000. Do you think that's a good idea? And, 10 women will write and say, yes, follow, just pay the money. And you're insane to someone would even think about buying into a business or becoming a partner with somebody else without having. That's the time when there's no just sidestepping. You actually need a legal opinion and a legal person to guide you through that process, or you can end up in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the cool things that you have is not just your book for people to read, but you have this really cool book of all of the legal documents that are great as a starting point. Because there's so many of these things that people need in their business. Can you go over kind of what's in this book of this magical book of things that you have?
Yeah. So I have it here. I have a copy of it here. Actually, you can't see it here. It's a book of forms. You can get an e-copy of this book with editable forms. And what I did in this book is I tried to, this isn't going to substitute for a lawyer, just to be really clear. But it does give you some basic forms that you can work from. And a lot of people are in by legal documents. Have policy. Employees, you have to have some policies, some employment policies. Ideally, you'll have an employment handbook that you would you would need a lawyer to write. But the law requires that you have, for example, in most states, the law requires that you have a sexual harassment policy. So an equal employment policy. You want to have a cell phone policy, and you want to have a computer policy. What can people do with the work computers? What can they do on behalf of your business online? What can they do while they're at work on their cell phones? What can they download? What can they send? You need If they're using a work computer, do you have the right to go into their computer, or into their cell phone? If they're sending information by their cell phone about your work, you need to notify them. Look, you use this, anything you use for work, we're going to have access to, and we're going to be monitoring. And so you need to keep controls over this sort of thing. You need to notify people. It's about fairness. Let them know, look, this is how you can use your cell phone at work. This is how you can use the computer at work. Here's what you do if you think that you've been sexually harassed. Here's what you do if the person who's sexually harassing you is the person you would normally report it to. What do you do then? So I created this book of forms where I have sample policies for people, sample letters if you have to do a collection, where you can say, hey, you owe me this money, a sample follow-up letter, a sample final letter. So I have sample agreements, like a partnership agreement, membership operating agreements, information about setting up partnerships, setting up LLCs. So lots of stuff. And then also professional services contracts. If you have a professional service contract, or you're a contract for the sale of goods, and a confidentiality agreement, which is probably one of the most important agreements that you're going to need in your business. And I'll talk about confidentiality agreements in another session, because it deserves its own session. But in any event, I have samples of these in this book for people to use as a starting point.
Yeah.
Haley, are you still there? I've managed to lose you. Oh, okay. I couldn't tell if you could see me or not.
I can see you. It's popping in and out. I have a guy down the street working on internet, so I'm wondering if it's on my side.
All right. Well, in any event, we're going to put a link to the book, which I'm going to provide. It's 66% off for when members only. And so you can get the book through there for $97. It's a really great thing to have. Yes. And it's helpful if you're intimidated by doing this kind of stuff to just have it there, at least a start, so that you have something to go on and what should this agreement even look like and what's normally in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I've paid a lot of money to get contracts just as a starting point before I even had an attorney look at them.
Right. I mean, it's always best.
Thousands of dollars.
Yeah, it's always best to have a lawyer, look at things. It's really helpful if you have a starting point and basically what it is you want, then, you can run it by a lawyer. But, when you're looking at lawyers charging between $300 and $600 an hour, you really, to the extent you can save some money on that, you want to do it. But I think a lot of people are just scared about legal stuff. And so they tend to just avoid it. And that's actually a bad idea. You really do. There's some things that you really do need in writing. So I wanted to provide that service. And I think it's really helpful and a good value.
So. This is a phenomenal value. Y'all grab the book. I'm going to post about it in the group some too. But I hope that you'll check it out because it's amazing. It's something that you really need in your business. I think my internet is being flaky. I don't know if Diana's is also being flaky, but we're going to call it good for now. Thank you guys for joining us. Give us a hello in the comments and in the chat and let us know, what you think. We'll talk soon. Thank you guys.
Bye guys. Thanks, Haley. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you for doing this. This is an awesome service. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye, everyone.